about the great Irish socialist James Connolly and his connections to Troy. He came to the United States in 1902 and moved to Troy in 1903, setting up a house at 96 Ingalls Avenue, a few blocks from where this forum was taking place. His children picked up work by sewing and starching shirt collars. He worked for a metropolitan insurance company until a recession caused the firm to falter. Before he lost his job and the family had to leave Troy, his daughter, Ina, recalled, "This was a wonderful place to live. We had many outings and gathering nuts. Some of these were sold to the stores, and we had enough nuts to last us the year. I remember the tomato crop my mother had. They were preserved, skinned, and bottled. We had apricots, quince, apples, and pears. You had a supply of these lovely fruits and savories the whole winter through, and there was never a shortage of these luxuries." While here, he was active in the, that is, James was active in the Socialist Labor Party, where he engaged in a notable dispute with its leader, Daniel De Leon, over the utility of fighting for wage increases. He was for this and other issues they had. The Troy branch of the SLP put Connolly on trial, but rather than expelling him, came over to his side and requested that De Leon print a brilliant statement by Connolly, proving how correct he was in the first place. He was a supporter of a strike by women workers here, but the hardships caused by the strike ended his insurance career and he left Troy. After that is when he really became famous. He went back to Ireland and played a leading role. He was one of the leaders in the Easter Rebellion and the great labor conflicts in Dublin. And eventually, because of his role in the Easter Rebellion, the uprising against British rule in 1916, he was executed by the British. Today he's recognized as one of the great socialist leaders of the 20th century. All right, so we have tonight Professor Moise St Louis at St. Michael's University outside of Burlington, Vermont. He's also Associate Dean of Studies there, and his interactions with the students are notable, and he is very well respected by his students there and takes that job very seriously. He teaches in the Political Science Department, and it's Peace Studies, is that? Peace and Justice Studies. Tonight he's going to talk about the current upheaval and uprisings in Haiti. I know a little bit about Haiti, but my knowledge and interest in Haiti goes way back. I first heard about Haiti when I was in college. And, well, I'd heard about Haiti, but I first became interested in Haiti when I was in college, learning that it was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And always interested me, and I wanted to kind of figure out the origins of that, like what's going on here in Haiti. And just sort of reading backwards, I came across the Haitian Revolution, one of the greatest human events, one of the greatest events in human history that few people know about, right? It's really the culmination of the Age of Revolution, and it really gives the most radical expression to the ideology of the Age of Revolution. It's a revolution that took place from 1791 to 1804. Began with a slave uprising in the northern plains of Haiti when tens of thousands of slaves revolted against their masters. And it ended in 1804 with the Declaration of Independence by Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Its primary leader was Toussaint Louverture, who some of you I'm sure have heard of. He's one of the great revolutionary leaders of the time. Its end result was the second Republican form of government in the New World, behind only the United States, the second independent nation, and the only time in human history that slaves themselves have overthrown the institution of slavery. And this took place over the course of about 13 years. My interest in this I pursued into graduate school because I wanted to really study how subordinated peoples appropriated the language of liberty and equality and made it their own, right? And how is very different from, say, the way the American founding fathers saw that same language. I ended up really studying more specifically the impact of the Haitian Revolution in the United States, and even more specifically in the city of New Orleans, where it had a great impact. And from this, I really learned a lot about the revolution itself and its impact more globally. I would argue that the Haitian Revolution's impact was far more important outside of Haiti itself than it was within Haiti, or at least that argument could be made. There's the social impact, the social cultural impact, which included parts of what I studied, the impact on racial identity and how people saw themselves and social structures within New Orleans. There's an economic impact. The destruction of the sugar industry by the revolution in Haiti really gave rise to a slave society or took Cuba to new heights in terms of slave society, and Cuba soon took over from Haiti as the #1 sugar producer in the world. I should have said it earlier, but on the eve of the Haitian Revolution, Haiti was known as the jewel of the Antilles because it made more money for people in Europe than anybody, than any colony in the New World. On the eve of the Haitian Revolution, Haiti produced 40% of the world's sugar and 60% of the world's coffee. And it made immense wealth for a very few Frenchmen on the backs of the most brutal and exploitive system of slavery the world has ever seen. The revolution itself involved so many different parties, and it took a lot of really taking advantage of particular situations. Toussaint Louverture was a master diplomat as well as a master military leader, and he took advantage of divisions within the society, divisions between the colonial powers of England and France. In the end, the Haitian army fought off the two greatest military forces in the world at that time consecutively, first the British and then the French. Napoleon sent his most trusted general and 60,000 troops in 1802 in an effort to reinstitute slavery, but was defeated by the former slaves. The impact goes far beyond that. The great historian Eugene Genovese refers to this transformative moment that the Haitian Revolution represented in slave rebellions, and in his book called From Rebellion to Revolution, in which he argues that prior to the Haitian Revolution, slave revolts were backward-looking, looking to recreate their existence in Africa, and they were led primarily by African-born slaves. After the Haitian Revolution, these rebellions were primarily led by Creoles or New World-born slaves, and their goals were not backward-looking, but in fact forward-looking in appropriating the most radical form of revolutionary ideology. After the Haitian Revolution, they spread this revolutionary ideology. Simón, the great liberator of Latin America, Simón Bolivar, took inspiration and support from the Haitian soldiers and Haitian leadership. So it brings me back to the question, why is Haiti so poor? Haiti paid a price for the only successful slave revolution in human history. They were immediately ostracized by all the European powers. And you talk about the power of sanctions, and that was essentially what was going on here. In fact, France, before France would even recognize Haiti's independence and trade with them, they demanded what they referred to as reparations from Haiti for the loss of the property, their enslaved property, in 1825. And Haiti paid that debt back until 1947. And in fact, in the total amount of dollars, in today's dollars, it was around $21 billion that Haiti paid to France. In 2003, then President Jean-Bertrand Aristide demanded a refund of that $21 billion from France. but was denied, of course, and was ousted about a year later. The connection there I can't speak to, really, but so I think it's interesting to think of these reparations, right? You have, today we talk about reparations and African Americans seeking reparations from the government for the wealth that they created for whites and their ancestors. And in this case, it was the whites asking for reparations for loss of their enslaved property. And all Aristide was asking for was a refund of that, much less the next step, which was reparations for the wealth that his ancestors and the Haitian ancestors had created for the French. So I want to end this introduction by referring to the greatest historian of Haiti that I know. He's not Haitian himself, he's Trinidadian, C.L.R. James. He was a historian, journalist, and socialist. And in his book, in reference to the Haitian Revolution and all uprisings, he says, the cruelties of property and privilege are always more ferocious than the revenges of poverty and oppression. For the one aims at perpetuating resented injustice, and the other is a momentary passion soon appeased. So with that, I would like to turn over to our speaker tonight, Moise St Louis. Thank you.
I can assure you that I don't have his eloquence. But thank you for a really nice introduction, because it frames what I hope to discuss with you. And in truth, what I hope to do is frame the conversation that we're going to be having. So let me put it this way. And I really want to thank the Connolly Forum for inviting me. John had been at me for some time. He's pretty unrelenting, actually. And so I finally said yes. And I'm so happy to be here around people who actually care about the state of the world. You know, the story of Haiti is a story of people determined to live free and really determined to create a state capable of preserving their freedom. And so at first I thought about changing the title of the talk, Uprising in Haiti. And I thought about that, but then I said, no, the narrative, the American narrative, and perhaps the international narrative, is that these Haitians are always in the street cleaning and asking for something. These crazy Haitians. There's nothing ever stable there. You know, there's always political quagmire there. And so, so I thought, let me leave it standing so we can help debunk some of that idea. You know, the Haitian had really claimed this notion that New Hampshire adopted liberty or death. And that still persists in the Haitian psyche. And in many ways, I want to shape the conversation by a determination of a population to not only assert their freedom in terms of politics, but to assert a particular type of freedom. And for that, they have been maligned, that it is not by accident. This gentleman earlier I was talking to introduced himself and said, I'm from the great state of Texas. And I asked, well, why is Texas a great state of Texas? And he said, you know, it's been drilled into our psyche that we are from this great state of Texas. And so I would contend that it has been drilled into your psyche of Haiti as the poorest nation of the Western Hemisphere. There isn't a conversation in the press, in the government, whatever framework of discussion that you have and you've had about Haiti, that signature persists, right? And it is not unintentional. It is not accidental. It is to shape and malign a particular search for freedom as unattainable, right? And so I want you to think about that as we converse today. And I also want you to think about a few things. Right? I want you to think about indebtedness as a form of domination. So I want you to think about that a little bit. And that there has been imposed dependence on nations that has undermined people's ability to shape their own lives and government's ability to shape the lives of their citizens in the positive. And that has been structured to a particular set of politics and economic and institutional structure. So I want whatever I'm going to be talking about, I want you to see that through this lens. Because the point about and the reason why I want us to do that is, and I'm returning to this issue of maligning the Haitians. It's a way to set people who are looking categorically for freedom as an example not to be reproduced. Right? That the Haitians sought a world, a different world, one that is not dominated by oppression and marginalization, resource exploitation and expropriation. And the rest of the world wanted you to think, and still wants you to think, that this endeavor is not possible, that it is unthinkable, that it will lead you to great destruction, that will undermine the very basis of society, that it will in fact destroy modernity and life as we know it. But what Haitians had offered was really a counter-narrative to the Western version of rights. Because you see, and that notion was not something they borrowed from the American Declaration of Rights that was particularist, right? It didn't include women, didn't include low-income whites, it certainly didn't include the Native Americans, and most certainly not the slaves. Particularist, meaning not inclusive, very particular to a certain group of population. It was not the kind of Declaration of Rights that the French claimed. Jews were not involved, women were not involved, and certainly not the slaves. What Haitians offered was a notion of right they gathered from the Mandan Empire, much older than the Magna Carta, much older than the French and American Declaration of Rights. That was inclusive of all human beings. That did not set parameters between men and women. right? That was the first Haitian Constitution of 1801. So the Menden, or the Mende Empire, the Mende Carter, or the Menden Carter as it often is called, and it's not very discussed in the West, stated the following. So I'm going to say that so we can really frame that there is, I always tell my students and my colleagues that if you can imagine it, you can have it. That our challenge is a challenge of imagination. And the project, the international corporate project, is to constrain our imagination. It's to constrain our imagination. So here it goes, and I quote, "Every human life is a life. It is true that a life comes into existence before another life, but no life is more ancient, more respectable than any other. In the same way, no one life is superior to any other. As each life is a life, any wrong done unto a life requires reparation. Consequently, no one should be gratuitously attacked by his or her neighbor. No one should wrong his or her neighbor, and no one should torment his or her fellow men and women. That each person should watch over his or their neighbors, that each person should venerate their progenitors, that each person should educate their children as it should be done, that each person should provide to the needs of their family and their community, that each person should watch over the country of their fathers, by country or motherland. One must understand also people from any country and any land who were to see people disappear will soon become nostalgic. That they stipulated the interconnections between human beings. There is nothing worse on this earth that as long as we hold the quiver or the bow, as long as we can defend ourselves, hunger will no longer kill anyone. If by any chance hunger were to arrive, we will no longer destroy any villages for acquiring the means of protecting themselves. That no man should be enslaved or incapacitated or forced against his or her will to do what he's unwilling or she's unwilling to do. That the essence of slavery should not exist in any land. That slavery is against humankind. Man as an individual made of flesh and bone, of marrow and nerves, of skin covered in hair, may eat food or drink, but his soul, his spirit lives on three things. And now you hear a lot about the French equality, fraternity, liberty and fraternity. But listen to this. That he must see what he or she must see what he or she wishes to see. He or she must say what he or she wishes to say, and do what he or she wishes to do. If none of these things were to miss, if one of these things were to be missed from the human soul, it would suffer and would surely become sick. In consequence, every human being should be entitled to shape his or her life according to his or her notions of freedom. So what the Haitians did is to ensure and enframe in their constitution that slavery would not only be eternally abolished, but that they would fight it wherever it existed, right? And so it is not by coincidence that they, if you look at all of the slave revolutions in America from 1802 onwards, were guided by people who were involved in the transportation industries in boats, who had visited Haiti, who had been counseled to lead revolution in the New World. Every revolutions in the Caribbean had been fomented and structured by Haitians who wanted to ensure that freedom, that slavery did not persist. That Haitians were keen on eliminating an institution which they found abhorrent to humanity. And that insistence in a world that is dominated and framed through slavery, that is guided by slavery, created the conditions for the maligning of Haiti and the targeting of Haiti and the framing of Haiti as a threat. So there's an interesting book you should probably read. It's called Haiti's Bad Press by Michael Lawless. And it frames the portrayal of Haiti from the South on forwards to really frame the kind of fear and threat that Haiti posed in the Caribbean and in the United States. And that resulted in 60 years of embargo and total encirclement of the island by all the major powers to ensure that Haiti could not transpose its ideology in their own world that depended on slavery. That did not, according to popular beliefs, undermine Haitian economy. What you would hear often is that the Haitian Revolution happens and the economy was destroyed. What you would know, what is real, is that the Haitians structured intentionally a way to expose the French and fight them, to make them understand that they will fight to the death and they will destroy the interests that they seek so much to undermine their freedom. So they did in fact destroy the major plantations. What is not reflected in the history is that within 5 years of their freedom, the Haitians had already reorganized their economy and was as prosperous as any of the Caribbean nations, and were already exporting their resources, and they were doing that even before the final fight for freedom. They were doing that expressly to organize an army, to arm an army, knowing that the French were going to come back. So this notion first that black people cannot lead, that they can't organize their economy and they can't organize their defenses and freedom is an untruth. That the Haitians had reorganized their economy and was quite successful. And I beg you to look into that in more depth. I'm framing that to frame the counter-narrative that has really stymied our understanding of Haiti. The Haitians wanted a state and they built one. And they started building it before they won their final independence from France. They wanted the Americans to recognize their independence. The Americans said, no, we're not going to do that. Because the Americans were fighting in conflict with the French, they were not opposed to Haitian independence at the time, because they feared, with the Haitian army having defeated the English, that the French could use the Haitian army, which was a major troop, and overthrew the American regime. And so there was an alliance, a convergence of interest between the Haitians and the Americans, which Toussaint used effectively to allay the Americans' fear and to buy guns from the Americans to organize an army that could defend against the French. That's often not discussed, but I can tell you that the ships that brought the guns came from Providence. So Newport is not rich by accident. It acquired some of its resources from the sale of guns. Right? But this notion of a Haitian state that was incapacitated because they fought for freedom, that was destroyed because they fought for freedom, is an untruth. Is an untruth. And so the Haitians built a state that could resist Western imposition, that could counter the forces of the West and pit one against the other, because the West was interested in goods and interest, and the Haitians had it. Right? They had goals. I'm saying that now because I'm going to end with that. Because this goal that they had, they still have, and it's estimated to be over $2 billion worth, over $20 billion worth. That is a goal that is deposited in the country. And so what you found, that become very relevant, that the Haitian built a state that resisted invasion, that persisted regardless of the way in which they were embargoed and encircled. They were encircled, in fact, but could not be invaded. Because the fear of the Haitian army across the world and the fierceness with which they fought prevented their invasion and re-enslavement. Now what happens? What happens of this army, of this well-established state, nationalist state? What kind of state was it? The state was constructed very specifically. There was an alliance between elites, former slaves who wanted to keep their freedom, who knew they could lose it at any time, but who were the elites. There were the everyday slaves who also could lose their freedom. And so these elites and the population formed an alliance that would preserve, that would construct a state that can balance the interests of the two. Right? So the state was not at the service of the elite, nor was it at the service of the populace. The state was an entity designed to balance interest. So there was a cost to violating the laws that maintain stability, because the context of the protections of everyone was more important than individual interest. You understand? And so the state, by design, was strong, was centralized, because it was waiting for an invasion, and wanted to balance the interest so that people saw in the preservation of the state the preservation of their own interests in their own lives. So in many ways, when we talk about when we hear political scientists talk, they talk about nation states. That means a group of people with common culture and interests form a state, and that evolves organically. In the Haitian context, you have to think about a state-nation. That is, the state is organized specifically to create a nation, to maintain a nation. Right? That is a particular type of state. Right? So I want you to think about that a little bit. That it's not a neo-colonial state. Right? That is a particular state that you want to think about as a state nation. That is a state crafted specifically for a purpose of maintaining the nation and cohesion within the nation. and the interests of everybody within the nation. That state was very successful indeed, and two things undermined it. The embargo had its effect. That the Haitians, though successful in their state, having defeated the French, found that they couldn't even buy a boat. Major form of transportation at the time. Right? And so they were forced, for example, to peddle their goods through intermediaries. Now, you know what happens with that kind of exploitation. That the amount of resources you can get from your goods are not what you actually get from a middleman. Right? And so that impacted the Haitian economy and the vibrancy of the state. The state found itself, because of the threat it posed, unable to buy new weaponry to protect itself from invasions and imposition. By law, the Constitution required every Haitian to carry a gun. Every household, by law, was required to carry a gun to protect the nation and one's family. Now, it's a different notion of gun ownership than the notion of gun ownership one has in this country. And I'm going to frame that because I think that conversation might come up. Gun ownership in this country, as stipulated, what is it, the Second Amendment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Second Amendment.
Thank you. I knew that. I just wanted to tease. Right? As stipulated, only expected certain men to carry weapons for what purpose?
To keep down the slaves.
Hey! Right?
Yes.
Right? It was for a purpose. To organize the militia when it was necessary to maintain domination. So the structure of the militia has evolved. But we'll leave that aside for now. Mm-hmm. The Haitian requirement was an expectation that one was required to not only protect oneself and one's family, but one's society, one's state, and one's community. Not for the purpose of domination, but the purpose of freedom. And so I want us to think, and it was a universal notion. And so it was not just that men, it was whoever was the head of the household. And it was not just men who were the head of the household, because it was not just men who fought for freedom or were general in the revolution. You understand? Women were very important in the Haitian Revolution. They fought in the Haitian Revolution. They were generals in the Haitian revolutions. So you could not have a constitution that did not uphold their rights. You understand? They emerged from a position of power, not just because it was informed by what they knew before, but also it was informed by the role they played. Right? So you had a society that emerged as an equal society. And part of the requirement of that society was that every household should have a plot of land. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that?
To allow each person to have access to agricultural production?
Right, the idea of being economically independent. That you had a responsibility to take care of yourself and your family, but also the responsibility, but also the right to ownership. Right, it's very important. that it was not rights without possibilities, but rights with the actual means to preserve and actualize those rights, right? In the 80s, the Haitian peasantry was the most well-off peasantry in the Western Hemisphere. They will not tell you that. They will not tell you that. And I will tell you how their dispossession came about in a minute. But the Haitian state found itself under the gun, and the French, because of the global arrangement to destroy it, the French, in collaboration with the Americans and the British, compelled the Haitians to pay them reparations. And so the resources, now you have to understand, the resources the state used to educate its population. Post-slavery, close to 1 million of the citizens were already educated. You don't know that. Right? And it was required that if you were educated, that every neighborhood should have a school, and those who are educated were supposed to educate the rest. Right? And it was required that every teenager, every young person should go to school. You don't know that. That right came later on in the United States. Right? Now we're talking about 1804. Right? You have to understand. The Haitians had a very different notion of freedom and engaging with their population. And there was a cost to that. And so the Haitian paid, meaning the resources they were using to support their population and protect the state were now being used to do what? To pay friends. For what? For losing the slaves and the plantations. Right? Now think about this. It's the first form of neo-coloniality. You understand? And it was done to economic submission. You understand? That's the first tryout. Now the form of neo-colonialism we have is done to the IMF and the World Bank, the banking system. Now you understand. Right? The French used that model that was then propagated. That you could be free, but you could still work for us and give us all the things that you work for. And that will limit the potential of your population to assert their freedom and their self-determination. Right? And so because of that, Western nations began to have an influence in the Haitian state and subverted the Haitian state. Right? How did they do that? Right? And I'm going to move quickly into contemporary time because I want us to have a broader conversation. So they did that. They changed the state. First, they forced a move of the capital to the center of Haitian resistance in the north, to the west, where it currently is, where the majority of those who fought and who could resist did not live. You understand? It's brilliant. It's brilliant, right? You don't want resistance, you move it from the people, right? Who can resist? So they did that. And they changed the nature of the state. A state whose role is to use the resources for external purposes and to support foreign powers is not a state that is designed to support its population. Right? It's a state against nation. Right? It's a neo-colonial state. It's the state designed for expropriation. You understand? And from that point on, what people often talk about Haitian instability has been a drive by the Haitian populace to reassert control over the state. And to not just reassert control over the state, but to reassert control over the direction and orientation of the state to create a state that is more responsive to their needs. And they managed to keep that new state unstable until it was consolidated by an invasion in 1915. What was that invasion? The American invasion of Haiti in 1915. Now, what is the broader context? What was America doing in the Western Hemisphere from the Monroe Doctrine up to 1915? Inserting a particular kind of dominance, political and economic dominance. The primary rule to dominate revenue of those states, right? Control the custom houses, all the major sources of revenue, and thereby dictating politics of the states. Why is that particularly relevant? Because that's the same model that Latin American and Caribbean states are being pressured upon. That is what we're seeing at the moment. That the continued imposition of that model on those nations. Right? So because Haiti was the last to be invaded, so you saw in Nicaragua, two things happened. The state was not only controlled, but the old nationalist military was destroyed, and Somoza's military was replaced. Right? Because you can't just dominate the economy and the politics, you need a shock troop to maintain it. Right? In Cuba, similarly. Right? The structure, the politics and economy was controlled, and the Batista regime and the military was reoriented to maintain that system. In the Dominican Republic, similarly. Throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, if it was not under British control, the Americans implemented a particular type of system. It was, for many folks, could have heard the term, the gunboat diplomacy. But it wasn't just gunboat diplomacy. If we could not control your economic and politics, then the gunboats would come. You have to understand. And so because it was hard to control, the Haitians would not submit. Even when they were paying the bulk of their revenue to foreign powers, they would not submit their sovereignty. Why? Because they fought for it. They would fight to reestablish control over their state, but sovereignty would not be submitted. And so the only way you could do that, having limited their capacity to arm themselves, you have to understand. Having limited their capacity to arm themselves, then you could invade. And so the first thing the Americans did, it wasn't to invade, it was to land and confiscate the Haitian gold. Go into the coffers in the Haitian banks and take out the gold. Now, why would you take out the gold?
By guns.
Because the gold for the Haitians, they could get loans even when you control external economy. If they had gold, they could leverage it. And they were able to resist American imposition because they had gold. So, if you want dependence, you have to create the conditions for dependence. And so they just forcefully just take the gold and put them where? In the New York banking system. So New York is not rich by accident, right? So they did that as the first condition. And then they were compelling the Haitian government to cede control over the revenue, which the Haitians refused. Whenever one government was so weak that they were going to do that, the Haitians overthrew it so that they can prevent that from happening. So you will see in the late 1800s and up to 1915, there were a lot of government overthrow in Haiti to precisely undermine the American pressure and supplant the government that was too weak to resist. You understand? So the portrayal of Haiti as an unstable space, Haitians were resisting imposition and assault on their sovereignty. And they were trying to impose and supplant government and impose government that can preserve their sovereignty. They failed. The American invaded. They imposed the will. First thing they did, they get some folks from the US to really determine what the Haitian government could spend or not spend. So to the point where when one Haitian ambassador died in New York, the American representative would not give the Haitian government money to repatriate his body. That's control, you understand? You have to understand, that's control. The American government was able to create a nation totally dependent on its will. And the original Americans killed close to 50,000 Haitians who were resisting American invasion, you understand? In 5 years, they killed 50,000 Haitians. The first act of bombing from a plane happened in Haiti. Bombing villages, you understand? You got to check the history. Concentration camps, taking entire villages and putting them in specific location. Arbitrary killing of people. Ransacking of homes. Wholesale punishment of areas that they thought was resisting. All of those happened to create a state that was subservient to the American will, a state that could not uphold its sovereignty. You understand? So what you found, therefore, between 1915 so the Haitians lost. So between 1915 and 1952, the Americans not only controlled the economy, they controlled who could lead the government in the nation. And one of the things that they did, they removed every black Haitians from governance of the nation. You understand? Now you have to understand why. And they ensured that the Marines who were in Haiti were from where? Where do you think? Because they knew how to treat the blacks. So the slaughter, the murdering, the arbitrary killing, is the same conditions blacks were experiencing in the South. The kind of dependence, right? And conditioning and wholesale destruction of a people's ability for self-determination is what was being imposed on the nation. You understand? So finally, it was the Haitian intellectuals who resisted. What people often don't know, that until the 1970s, Haiti produced more intellectuals than the whole of the Western hemispheres combined. Like French institutions depended on Haitian intellectuals. People don't know that. That when Canada, after World War II, were looking for French educators, de Gaulle told them, if you want them, you better go to Haiti. And so if you see the early manifestations of universities in Canada, you'll see them replete with Haitians. Right? So the Haitian intellectuals resisted, they fostered resistance and push, they engaged in a global propaganda campaign against American occupation, and the Americans had to live. They had to leave the country. Right? leaving the country is not the same as not controlling the country. Because what did they leave? The economic control persisted, right? And the military that they had created and imposed on the nation to maintain the order persisted. And so you see in Haiti that you heard a lot about Papa Doc. He was a madman. He killed a lot of people, and so on. What people often don't discuss is that he emerged out of a contestation by the majority of the Haitian population who wanted to eliminate, right, the Jim Crow racialized system the Americans had imposed on the nation. A nation that had been created to preserve freedom had been restructured based on race and skin color. So all of those who dominated Haitian politics during the American occupation until 1915 were light-skinned or white-looking Haitians. You don't miss that. So the emergence of Papa Doc was as reivindication for the mass population who wanted a state that not only represented their interests, but whose leaders also represented them. Right? So Papa Doc emerged, faced by a military that was organized by the Americans to maintain the established order. All of the echelons of the military were racialized, right? Dominated by white-looking Haitians. You don't see them on TV now because the projection you want to see of Haiti is just a bunch of crazy black people running around, right? Right. And so Papa Doc emerged and wanted to change the direction of the nation because the population willed it, and he did. He did. He established a very strong middle class, right? The black middle class. The reason why you have a black middle class in Haiti is because he established it, right? All the representations of that you see of black Haitians who've emerged economically is because they emerge out of that context. But there's also violence, right? Because you don't overthrow an established system to regain control over it and redirect it without violence. Because there's resistance. And in many ways, that violence was unexcusable, right? Because it destroyed the cream of the crop of American intelligentsia. Brilliant human beings found themselves under the gun, had to either leave the country or found their deaths. Young people who also wanted a different nation and who found themselves caught in that power politics also found themselves under the gun. So a crop of very promising Haitians were destroyed out of that context of emerging from American domination. But what was achieved is national control, but external domination. You understand? Yeah, you could control what your people do as long as you do what we tell you to do. Well, in many ways, it's a system called dual clientelism, right? The national government is dependent on external forces to stay in power, but also can use those resources to dole out and maintain dominance, right? And so that system persists throughout the Caribbean, right? And so what you found, therefore, and I'm going to speak for 5 more minutes, is that the Haitians understood that that was not the model that they wanted. And the baby Doc, which was the father of, the son of Papa Doc, made that even clearer for them. Because whereas Papa Doc really used the resources to strengthen the nation, a lot of the state-owned industries that employed most of the Haitians were created and established under his leadership. You understand? His son used those resources, would have supported his father, fought for a different regime, and the democratization process began. Many Haitians died to fight that process of fighting to establish control over one's state and destiny. Haitians saw the democratic process as that process. And they fought. Many people died. A cousin of mine died. I was engaged. My parents had to move me out of the country because somebody told them that I was going to be killed. And so many young people died because we believed that democracy would give us the power to shape our destiny in our government. And in fact, what happened is that 90% of Haitians went to the polls, under much violence. Much violence went to the polls because the established order, that military, was preserving Western interest. And Western interest that was very much associated with elite's interest. Right? But Haitians wanted something different, so they fought for it. And they elected their government. 90% participated. They elected their government by 67%. That was Aristide's first term. Within 7 months, he was overthrown. Why? By the CIA. Well documented. The guy that overthrew him worked for the CIA. Well documented. It was even in the New York Times. Well documented. Overthrown by the CIA. Over 5,000 people died in a week. I went back to Haiti. I gave my mother a heart attack, actually. I went back to Haiti to move people around because so many people were getting killed. And I'll share this anecdote with you. And so I was hiding. So I was in a place hiding people in the middle of the capital. And the military would go around and pick people up. And so one night the day before, I was sitting there talking with a lot of the folks who were hiding. And I was talking to two gentlemen, young people, 17, 18. And they were the only one left in their families. And the only reason why they were saved is because on their way home, somebody told them that the military had gone to their neighborhood. And so they ran. And they were the only two people who were left in their family because the military killed them. Not because they were rebels, just because they voted. Understand? That's the cost of freedom. And so that night, that gave me purpose. I said, man, I was doing something. And so that night, when the military came to that street and started banging on the door because they didn't know where people were hiding, so I assumed they were banging to assume that there was going to be enough movement that they could come in. Because it was a fairly well-to-do neighborhood. And so we were like, we were scared because we would not have made it that night. And thankfully, they did not come in. And someone was, unkind enough to tell my mom. And so she was in the state and she had a heart attack, so I had to come back to the States. Right? Because my dad was killed because of his involvement in politics. And so my mom, being her only son, did not see the idea of losing her son did not sit quite well with her. And so the Haitians really who fought for their freedom with their blood, historically, right? And so the government was overthrown. The Haitians stayed on the street fighting and saying that you can kill us as you will, but we want our government back. And they made the country ungovernable so that the Americans had to return the guy to Haiti, you understand? They took him out and they had no choice but to return him. But Bill Clinton returned him under specific conditions. Right? Specific conditions. So if you look at the Governor's Accords Agreement, he was supposed to privatize every major industry, state-owned industry in the country. Right? And so what he did, understanding the country, the second he got back to the country, you know, as the American military landed him in the country, he disbanded the military. Now why would you want to do that? Because this is the only force capable of maintaining the status quo. So he did that. You know, military, you're going to have to deal with the interests of the population. The elites have no protection, so you have to then form a social contract with the population. Create the condition for the state, the original Haitian state. You understand? Create the conditions of interdependence that existed during the formation of the first Haitian state. Of course, the Americans said, well, you can only spend the time that you have back, the time you spend in exile, you can consider it counted as president. And so, and he could not run two consecutive terms, so he convinced somebody to run who won the election. And what he did, the Americans putting pressure on that new government to privatize. So Aristide, on the other hand, started fighting against privatization. Right? So the guy had no choice. He was an ally of Aristide. He was under pressure. He wanted to privatize some things. Aristide was very popular. Aristide was preventing privatization. So after the guy's term is over, he ran, he won by 90% of the vote. You understand? Because the people understand where their interests lie. Right? He won by 90% of the vote. He did not only win by 90% of the vote, his party won an overwhelming majority of the houses. What does that mean? That means he had the power to permanently shift the direction and orientation of the state. Understand? Because you control both houses and the government, and he could have done that indefinitely. I was in Haiti at the time. I was working. I had very many friends in the opposition, quote unquote. I saw many embassy visits to their homes. And so I knew the Americans did not want that kind of dominance. And so in the American press, and the left here have to be conscious of the propaganda campaign, effective, that happens with government of the left. It's effective propaganda maligning these governments. The Americans had an effective propaganda campaign that created an Aristide the monster, a dictator, a killer of people, right? And some of the left bought it. And so they were able to overthrow the guy, right? They did not only overthrow him, they prevented his party from running in elections. They exiled him. Now, the major insult to Haitian identity is this notion that they don't belong in their own nation. And that insult is an American insult. When you tell an African American to go back to Africa, the country that they had built, you tell them to go back to Africa. So the Americans and the French who overthrew Aristide did the same. They took Aristide and exiled him in the Central African Republic. It's a go back to Africa moment for Haitian. The greatest insult to Haitian national identity. Not because we hate Africans or Africa, we pretty much identify, but because this is our nation. We fought for it, we died for it, our ancestors own it. So to take a Haitian citizen, duly elected by the population overwhelmingly, and to send him back to Africa. It's a historical moment. And so they did that. They prevented the party from running, right? And in so doing, prevented the party from reasserting control, and they imposed their own government in the nation. And from then on, all of the governments that have been imposed on Haiti has been governments that are not widely supported by the population. The population that voted from 90% now votes from less than 17%, you understand? Why? If you ask the average Haitian, they will say, I will vote when my vote will count for the direction of my nation. I know because I ran a survey in Haiti. They will tell you we have no confidence in the existing government because these governments do not represent our interests. Haiti is not being represented. These governments are representing external interests. They are not our government, they are imposed. And often these governments have been forced now, they have privatized most of the state-owned industries, which have impoverished the nation. So people cannot work, not because they didn't have work before. I'll give you an example. Haitians to produce enough sugar to sell. The sugar industry was bought and summarily closed. You understand? Haitians used to produce enough cement, because that's the nature of its land, enough cement to export. The cement industry was privatized and summarily closed. You know what that means? It means dispossession of the state of the Haitian people. The peasantry, who had the capacity to sustain itself and send its kids to school, rice, and to produce enough rice, not only to feed the population but to export. Rice, cheap rice was flooded in the country. The government, dependent government, were forced to pass policies and destroy the rice market in the country and rice production in the country. That's forceful dispossession. You understand? The Haitian peasantry were depended on pigs that they would grow throughout the year, so that when school time comes, they can sell it and send their kids to school, because it was cash. The American government compelled the Haitian government to engage in a wholesome slaughter of the Haitian pig. Well documented, wholesale slaughter of the Haitian pig. Why? In order to sell extra pigs from the US. Destroy the Haitian cash, right? They would use that to sell their kids to school and to buy stuff to plant. Destroy that, and what did they do? They sell them now the pigs that they have to buy food to feed, instead of the stuff that they grow themselves to feed. So if you see hunger in the nation, that hunger and poverty is not accidental. It is imposed. You understand? That hunger is imposed. So now, what we have seen in our government, we have gold deposit, as I said, and I'm going to end. You know, the Clinton administration had forced the Haitian government, because it was a government they imposed. So Clinton's half-brother was the primary, he's not even on any company, but he signed the contract for gold exploration. The Haitian people were not having it. And so they forced the government to get out of there. Because they said, that's a lot of money. We can't do that. So the Haitian took to the street. They said, no, that contract can't go. That's enough. So the guy had to leave. That's my theory. The conditions that this government came into power was with the help of the OAS. You see the role the OAS is playing now in other countries in Latin America? It's an institutional structure for imposition. So the OAS said there were 3 people running, 2 were going to the final vote. The guy did not win. The numbers were clear. The Americans objected and forced the elimination of one of the 2 people who won, so this guy can run, aided by the OAS. It's the same thing that just happened in Bolivia. Understand? Same thing that just happened in Bolivia. OAS came in, said the vote is illegitimate, and then forced the overthrow of the government, right? The problem is they could not overthrow the government in Haiti without an external force because the military had been disbanded. And so what did they do? How do you maintain the dominance? The UN. You understand? The UN mandated forces. That model is being implemented across the globe. This is not a search for freedom. This is the imposition and the maintenance of a system to maintain the status quo, right? And that has persisted. And so now the Haitians are in the streets. They are demanding a rearrangement as they've done historically. They are demanding a government that represents them. The government that was elected by less than 9% of the vote. You understand that people are not voting, people they don't think are going to represent them. But it's also a government that is caught within a system that it's also trying to change. And I want to be nuanced. It's a government that's also trying to regulate, to reassert a level of state control and regulate an elite that has used the nation as a plantocracy, that has embellished its pockets at the detriment of the population. So one of the ways in which the government has been trying to do that is to regulate contracts. That's where all the money goes. And so the elites are very much involved in some of what you're seeing. They are paying people to protest the government. So there are 2 things going on at the moment that you have to be careful about. One of them is an elite who's trying to undermine a government that's trying to impose some rules. And the other one is a population that has had enough, that wants a state that takes care of its needs, that's responsive to its needs, that wants accountability and want to reduce corruption. They want a democracy that is representative. And so the fight, the Haitian historical fight, is the ongoing fight. And I think in many ways this is the fight Americans are facing. It is a fight of an elite and corporations run amok, determined to marginalize the rest of the population for the benefit of a few, determined to craft the politics and the direction of state to maintain it. And they will result in all sort of violence to do that. In the state, what you see is hyper-police militarization. Because as a political scientist, the more inequality, the higher police militarization. Because people don't want to stay poor indefinitely. They will resist. And so you see that tension in the states. And one of the ways in which that dominance is being played out in the Caribbean and Latin America, and you can see in Haiti, the people are resisting. In Bolivia, the people have been resisting for a while, but because of the imposition of the military, they have lost momentarily. In Colombia, there is push. In Venezuela, there is tension. the US is trying to reimpose a system that had been taken over to better serve the population, and all of those resources that they had not had control over, they want to be able to reassert control over them. In Bolivia, the amount of lithium the country has, government that was looking for the interests of the people had to go because it was renegotiating lithium. The Haitian case, the gold deposit and oil deposits are large. And the Haitians want to say in the direction of the country, and they will have it by blood if necessary. Because the Haitians have a history of resistance at all cost. The Haitian genius is that the population, once determined, you can kill 1,000 or 50,000, they will keep coming. That is how they won their revolution. And sometimes historical precedents inform the psychological predisposition of a population. And so the West at some point have to come to terms that you cannot dispossess people indefinitely, that you have to give people the ability to live their lives and feed their families. And as they're imposing in the nations abroad, they are imposing here. And the questions to Americans is, if you don't change the orientation of the nation here, it will be hard for other nations to change theirs. At the end of the day, the responsibility is yours. You've got the mechanisms to change the orientation of your state in a way that the mechanisms in other nations have been usurped and dominated. I will end there.
Okay, so we have about 20 minutes for questions. Would you like me to moderate, or would you just like to take the questions yourself? Okay, I'll moderate. And we'll follow a rule where we'll let everybody who has a question or has something to say speak first before somebody doubles up. Okay, and we'll try to alternate between men and women, if that works. All right, so questions, yes. And can you please identify yourself before you ask your question?
Yeah, my name is Ruth. I thought it was interesting you said that the U.S. government in the early 1800s was supportive of, the Haiti as a country. And when they weren't threatened by the idea of, slaves rising up and being successful, which obviously in the South wasn't appreciated.
Yeah, but they were also concerned about French invasion.
That was the dominant
Right,
concern.
and so they wanted the Haitians to undermine French power.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
The failure of that was the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
So that because the Haitians were able to do that, the French had to sell Louisiana to the Americans.
Well, first I want to thank you. That was an incredible presentation. I really learned a lot and changed my orientation and thinking on certain things. Really happy to hear it. In terms of the uprising now, and you talked about the opposition in quotes, could you explain a little bit more about who's behind it? Are there organizations, are there parties, is there socialist orientation? Is it, where does it come from and where's it going? And is it spontaneous? Is it organized? What's happening?
I think a good cross-section of the resistance is spontaneous. Like the Haitian populace want in no direction. And so that is happening, and that's unlikely to stop. And so the Haitian population is out. It doesn't really have any clear leader, and that's part of the problem. It is the population at the moment who are pushing for change. So the majority of those in the streets are folks who are really pushing for a new orientation. There is a group of people who are getting paid. I was telling my friends earlier that there was, I had a video of a nice four-wheel Benz who stopped in the middle of a protest and started handing out envelopes to keep the protesters going. And so there is also that going on. But there is an organic uprising of the population because they want their kids to have a better outcome. And they want the state to be responsive to their needs. So it's a bit of both, but the majority is people who really want change.
Yeah.
Yeah, what about that the protest around the $2 billion from Venezuela? What do you know about that?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the popular protest, is that because the government that have been imposed on the nation are not representative of the people and don't care so much about the interests of the people. So the resources of the state has been stolen. And so the resources the state could use to really engage with schooling and to really invest in the population have been stolen. And the people are pretty mad against that, right? And so the people are demanding accountability and demanding government will not steal the remaining resources of the state. And so that's really informing some of the, so in many ways, if you follow Haitian websites and Facebooks, you'll see there is this big questions, where is the money? Where's the Petro-Carib money, right? Because the people want accountability for that resource, and they will have it.
Right here?
Yeah, I just have two quick questions. One, regarding Lablas, so is that movement completely disbanded since the election when it was imposed that they could no longer run? And then my other question is regarding paramilitary activity. I read a Jeb Sprague article a couple months ago that discussed the modernization of paramilitary activity in Haiti, especially after the dissolution of the Haitian National Military, and I didn't know if you could speak on that and those activities, because I often see on Haitian media pages a lot of assassinations, or at least alleged assassinations, as a result of that.
Yeah, well, you know, the part of the process would be to create a weak state, right? Part of the privatization of state resources is to create a weak state that is dominated by NGOs, right? As a result of creating a weak state, you have a weak law and order. You have weak protection of the population. And so because of the vacuum of state presence, of state power, you have all kind of hoodlums with guns that have been circulating to protect specific interests and also commit crime. And so the Haitian state, for the Haiti for the very first time, is really experiencing a level of violence dominated by people who are really supported by different factions to maintain that kind of violence because the state is not there. And so that's been a major challenge in the nation. And part of what the current government is trying to do is put a measure to that. But it's against the interests of many who want that instability in order to keep fleecing the state. And so it's a particular historical moment also in the nation. And Haitians have had enough of that too. And so one of the things that is happening is that Haitians now, because of the vacuum of the state, are creating neighborhood committees to protect themselves against that kind of arbitrary violence. And so if you come into a neighborhood at night thinking you're going to be killing or intimidating people, you might not come out because the population has been determined at the absence of the state to protect itself. So there is also that going on. But one of the things to think about, and I'll be brief, is that the Americans in overthrowing Aristide really, in order to do that, created a paramilitary group because the military wasn't there, which they armed and trained in the Dominican Republic and enabled to cross the border and come into the country. It's the first time in Haitian history that this force come outside of the country of Haitians armed and by the American government to come and overthrow a legitimate government. That had never happened. And it would not have happened because the people had also taken up arms and went and said, you will not come into the city. And because they could not come, the well-funded paramilitary group by the American could not come, the Marines and the French had to come, right, to remove the government by force, because the force they had created to do that could not do that.
Yeah, I think I saw this gentleman first.
Jason. And one of the things that I think those of us old enough to remember, Clinton sending Aristide back to Haiti on a U.S. naval vessel with these neoliberal strings attached.
Yes.
I have an understanding of the way in which U.S. imperialism can present itself as operating under a humanitarian face or a humanitarian cover. One of the things that struck me when the U.S. Army went into Haiti following the hurricane is the way that that dynamic plays out, and the uses of Haiti that way in terms of saying that there's this humanitarian crisis and that justifies, you know, the U.S. going in on humanitarian grounds. It's not gunboat diplomacy anymore. I was wondering to what degree, obviously there are sincere humanitarian groups, but to what degree NGOs and other ostensible joint ventures or things like that are actually fronts of the CIA or connected to U.S. corporate interests in trying to reassert sort of a hegemony in Haiti for U.S. imperialism.
Not just in Haiti, right? That's a model that you have to look for across the world. When, at the emergence of democratization, right, what you find is that government then have to be more responsive to their population. Meaning they used to have the state a bit more to meet the demands of their population. So in that case, meaning they have to control some of the resources. So what do? You undermine the state and state capacity. And you create NGOs that replaces the state. You understand? So it's a model of creating state failure and then flooding NGO to create dependence so that, in fact, democracy will not serve the interests of the population. So it's a model. I want you to think about it more as a model that is being enforced to dilute the power of the state in the face of democratic emergence, about democratic power.
Hi, I'm Derek. I was wondering what's your opinion on the sort of broader context of this turn, it seems to me at least, towards like Bolivia, what's going on in Chile. It seems like the Trump administration is sort of turning back to South America, and I'm wondering if you think that's a sign of America's weakness on the world stage as an imperialist power, or a sign of strength, sort of a possible implication for that.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. The way in which you think about it, part of Americans' power is corporate interest. America has exercised its power to its corporations and domination of finances, right? And when that fails, they bring force, but they've done that effectively to that. And those states had shifted that in the 90s and 2000s. They'd shifted that paradigm, meaning they had pushed the corporations out. They had reasserted control over their natural resources, and they had begun to reorient some of those resources towards their population. So what you find at the moment is a strategy it's a pushback. It's a strategy to reassert the control over these states and state resources again. That's all. Right? It's well propagandized as freedom and maligning those governments as anti-democratic. But it's a strategy to force a realignment to the status quo.
I'm familiar with a group called Foncose.
Yeah.
That's a development bank in Haiti. Are
Yeah.
they legitimate in your opinion? Because the sense I get is that they are.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of groups who are trying to do the right thing and support the population. I think Francois is one of them, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
My name is Charles. What you said about NGOs struck a chord with me in terms of privatization and contracting out here in the United States. I work for the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities
Yeah.
here in New York State. We employ 15,000 or more direct care workers. during the Obama administration, the word came from Washington all of a sudden that this Medicaid financing program that we had been using, that had been approved by the federal government 28 different times, is now illegal. And therefore, we would have to find a way to finance our services differently. We would get less money from Medicaid. The whole purpose of that, people behind the scenes would admit, was to privatize those 15,000 direct care jobs and make that agency, leader in the country, into a regulatory agency for the nonprofit sector. So basically, what you would then see is the capture of this regulatory agency by the entities that we regulate, just like we see on Wall Street with the various regulatory agencies being captured by the brokers and what have you. And when you said that, I was like, we have a domestic version of this,
Yes.
and we have a foreign version
Yes.
of this, of undermining the capacity of the state to actually function and do
And
what the
regulate.
public wants.
That's right.
And one way they do that is with nonprofits, voluntary agencies here, and NGOs in foreign
Yeah,
countries.
that's exactly right. And I think that's why I want to be clear that part of that conversation is not different here. The undermining of unions
Yep.
to undermine the population ability to self-advocate is part of the process.
Yep.
The undermining of the regulatory capacity of the state and the control of the politics of the state is part of the process. It so happens that it kills more people more quickly in the Caribbean and Latin America. But it's killing Americans just the same.
Oh, yeah.
You understand? And it's impoverishing the Americans just the same. And it's diminishing the power of the middle class just the same. A middle class that democracy is dependent on the power of the middle class. Democratic stability is dependent on the power of the middle class. And so if you diminish it, you diminish democracy. So you have to understand, Americans, because they're not suffering as much, may not understand that they're under the same attack. You understand? They have enamored themselves with this notion of we are the most democratic country in the world. Not understanding that they're getting their clock cleans, just like the rest of us.
Yes, one subject we haven't broached on yet is the one that is going to affect most countries in this world to a lesser or greater extent, and that is climate change. And now Haiti has suffered deforestation in the past. It doesn't look to me as though the agricultural economy is very resilient. What do you think the position is in terms of food resilience in a time of increasing change of climate?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think already food resilience have been impacted by the things I talked about before. Not to include climate change and what is happening in deforestation. And so I think that there's a level of dependency that's happening that never happened. That had never happened in Haiti. Haiti is importing food that it used to produce and export, right? And so Haitian agricultural production used to kind of dominate the Caribbean. You know, Caribbean nation used to come to Haiti to buy stuff. And so now the nation and the people are not able to do that. They're not self-reliant anymore because climate change is impacting that, but policy, external policies have diminished that quite a bit. So I think that's an ongoing discussion. But I think state reorientation will change some of that because the Haitians still have the capacity to produce and be self-reliant in agricultural production and feed themselves.
One more? One more, yeah, I saw it.
Thank you very much. This kind of ties into the sort of manufactured perception of freedom that you were talking about that a lot of Americans have. And I was wondering if maybe you had a way to kind of engage a particular kind of person, and I'll say for the sake of example, like a Bolivian immigrant to America who swears up and down that Morales is corrupt and the coup is righteous. Because I feel like this is one of those like broad concepts that almost requires like a 45-minute research thing before you can even begin to discuss it with somebody of that mindset. So I wanted to ask you how you might go about addressing these issues with someone of that general perception.
Well, I would ask them to talk more. I always think the best way to engage people who are convinced of things is to ask them more questions. Whenever people say they don't like black people, I like to ask them another question. I think convincing people is hard. I think getting people to talk so that they can understand their own contradiction is what you do. You see? And I think the power of listening is an amazing thing. And sometimes we ought to use it and do less convincing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm sorry I spoke so long.
Yeah.